hopefully. There we go. Okay, number 1 says, baking is like blank, a chemical experiment. The blank recipe is the formula and the ingredients are the chemicals. How the ingredients are mixed, shaped, and baked gives the recipe its unique flavor, texture, and appearance. And that is true of any recipe. They're all kind of like a chemical experiment. Next week, we're doing function of ingredients, and the lab will be pancakes. And I call it the Pancake Experiment Lab because you learn about each step ingredient and what its function is. Number 2, and those of you that have made cookies or those of you that haven't could probably guess what the basic ingredients are needed for cookies. You need flour, sugar, could be white, could be brown, could be both, fats, your butter, shortening, etc., eggs, flavorings, and leavening agents. So 3 says the 2 qualities of sugar. You could probably guess flavor right away. We know that anytime we add sugar to something, it sweetens it up, gives it flavor. The other characteristics is browning. So that's what's going to make your cookie brown, because the heat modules will connect with the sugar and turn your cookies brown. 2 leavening agents. A leavening agent is something that makes your product rise. So in cookies, it's probably baking soda or baking powder, and you can't switch them. So if the recipe called for baking soda, you must use baking soda. You can't use baking powder. You might say, oh, well, we don't have baking soda, so I'm going to use baking powder. Your cookies won't rise. They'll be flat and they'll be crispy. So if it says baking soda, use baking soda. Or if it says baking powder, use baking powder. Baking soda always needs some type of an acid. A baking powder needs a liquid in a quick bread, which we'll learn next week. 2 different fats, as I mentioned, you could have butter, margarine, oil. Shortening is the solid fat. We learned about the good and bad. It's not a good fat. A brand name is Crisco. It's a hydrogenated vegetable, which means hydrogenated air has been added into it. It looks like whipped cream, but it sure doesn't taste like it. It's nasty flavor. What's the purpose of an egg? In a cookie, it's a binder. It means it helps bring your ingredients together. Eggs have several properties, and we'll talk about eggs and its properties next week. 7 examples of flavorings. In a chocolate chip cookie, it would be your vanilla and your chocolate chips. Now, there are lots of different flavorings, also called extracts. So you might have almond, peppermint, lemon, mint. There's lots of different ones. And some people will consider nuts as a flavoring. So something that's going to give it some taste. 8, we've had this term cream. The process of softening fat with sugars is called creaming. It's the first step in cookie making. You'll take your whatever fat you're using, your butter and your sugar, and mix that together. 9, to bake great cookies, make sure the oven has been preheated and the racks are placed in the middle of the oven. You want to put them in the middle if you can, because the heat then circulates around the pan. You can also start one pan probably like 2 sections from the bottom, and then you raise it up and put your second pan in. You just don't want to put 2 pans in at the same time because the heat can't circulate around the pan to get your cookies done. Why is it important to pay attention to the recipe's directions about how far apart? Right, so they don't spread together. Usually when you're doing cookies, you want to go about 3 across your pan and 4 down. Some people have already yesterday made cookies or last night, and I noticed in 2 of the situations, they put all the cookies on one pan. And they look like bar cookies now, like a pan of brownies would be. And I could see the one girl tried to cut them apart, and I'm sure they tasted fine, but Again, you're probably going to need 2 cookie sheets for our recipes. The snickerdoodles you need even more because that makes a little bit more, but we'll talk about those recipes in a few moments. So the most popular cookie was the brownies. How does it differ? Your bar cookies usually put them into a 9x13 pan or a square 8x8 pan. 2 advantages to making refrigerator cookies. As you'll learn at the bottom here, there's all the different types of cookies. Refrigerator is one of them. It's very similar to the cookies that you buy in the refrigerator department at the grocery store, where they have like the Toll House chocolate chip cookies, and you can just bring them home and you can either take your spoon, or some of the stiffer like sugar cookies, you can slice them. And that's exactly what, excuse me, a refrigerator cookie is. You make it, you roll it up in, I usually roll mine in wax paper, and then I can slice them off and bake them whenever I want them. So it's convenient. You can eat them when you need it. You could freeze them and have them next week if you wanted to. Another type of cookie on 14, peanut butter cookie, is a molded cookie. That will be the same as the snickerdoodles if you decide you're going to make those. Molded means you're going to roll them in a ball. In a peanut butter cookie, you'd roll them in a ball, and then you'd flatten them with your fork or glass, or sometimes a cookie mold. In the snickerdoodles, you roll them in a ball, and you roll them in cinnamon and sugar. You don't flatten them down, though, but you do roll them in a ball. You mold them. Why should crisp cookies not be stored with soft cookies? Well, your crisp cookies will get soft. And if you want them to be soft, that's one way you could soften it. But if you want them to stay crispy, then they need a separate container, separate Tupperware or whatever you're keeping those cookies in. So then I added the 6 different cookie types here on the bottom because the recipe or these questions kind of talk about them, but they don't give it directly. So molded cookie they talked about. Drop would be the chocolate chip cookies. Oatmeal cookies, if you've ever made them, or oatmeal raisin would be a drop. Means you use, if you watch the videos, you use either a cookie scoop or you take a spoon. I usually take 2 spoons. I take 1 spoon and get my dough and use the other spoon to push it off. That's a drop cookie. Drop it onto the cookie sheet. The bar cookie we talked about. Rolled, most of the time you think of probably sugar cookies or gingerbread cookies, where you'd roll out the cookie dough, and then you take your cutters, and maybe it's at the holidays, you might do bells and Christmas trees, stars, gingerbread people. If you rolled out your gingerbread cookie dough, you'd have the gingerbread man. And then refrigerator we talked about, the frozen, or you can put in the refrigerator dough that you put into a tube or a log. And then pressed, if you were in my classroom, I'd show you what the cookie press looked like. Ours are the old-fashioned, where you put the dough in and you crank it from the top, and then at the bottom you can put different discs to make cookies. Some people have something called the super shooter, where you put the cookie dough in and it's got a lever, and you just drop them across your cookie sheet. The old-fashioned one is you turn it, and for each turn, you turn it till it touches the cookie sheet, and you lift it off kind of quick. A lot of people will make them at holidays because, again, there's some discs that, there's one that is a tree, or they'll make stars. There's lots of different little flowers that people have made with a pressed cookie. That cookie dough is real stiff. It's usually a large amount of butter and flour to make the dough stiff. In fact, you usually need to chill it so it is stiff enough because it's going through a cylinder onto your cookie sheet. So I'm going to come back and ask if you have any questions. I know I went through that really fast. Nobody else joined us for a small group today. Any questions on cookies? I'm going to go through the 2 recipes, and again, I'm going to go through that kind of quickly. See if it pops in here. Yep. Okay, I'm going to make this bigger again. So this is Mrs. Fields chocolate chip cookies. The most important thing I want to tell you is that I have cut this recipe in half, so it makes about 20 to 24 cookies. If you want to do more than that, then you'd need to double it. In our class, the reason I've cut the recipe in half, in our class we only have time to make 2 pans, because in class you'd only have about 45 minutes. By the time you get your apron and wash your hands and have dishes to do, you only have about time for 2 pans. So as I copied this last night, that white sugar should have been underneath the butter. It just kind of jumped. Half a cup of butter is a stick of butter, so you don't have to measure that. And then when you cut the recipe in half, if it's a full recipe, it would be 3/4 cup of white sugar and 3/4 cup of brown sugar. So when you cut it in half, you get a weird measurement of 3/8 cup of white and 3/8 cup of brown. If you convert that to tablespoons, there's 1/8 of a cup would be 2 tablespoons. So you go 3 times 2 would be 6 tablespoons of white sugar, which would be, if you're a good math person, 1/4 a cup of white plus 2 tablespoons. That would give you your 6. Your brown sugar you have to pack. And just a reminder, these are in the order of use. So I've got my butter, sugar, brown sugar, then I have an egg. TSP is teaspoon, and a small t means it's teaspoon. So you want to make sure that when you're looking at your set of measuring spoons that you're using the teaspoon. The largest one on your set would be the tablespoon. Then you'll have a teaspoon, a half a teaspoon, and 1/4 a teaspoon. Now you may have more than that on your set at home, but that's the basics. You want to make sure you don't put a whole tablespoon, that would be capital T or TBSP of vanilla. And then it kind of jumped here too. It's 1 full cup and another 1/4 of a cup of flour. Half a teaspoon of baking soda. Remember, that's what's going to make your cookie rise. Half a teaspoon of salt, and a cup of semi-sweet chocolate chips. Of course, you could use milk chocolate or other chocolates, chunks, whatever you want. You could use butterscotch chips, whatever you like to put in your cookie, or some people will put walnuts or pecans or something. So then your recipe, last time in the recipes I kind of had them by steps. Usually it's like this in a paragraph. Always, just like last time with the pizza bubble bread, you're going to preheat your oven, and this time it's 350. The first step, and you can do this by hand in a bowl with a wooden spoon, or you could use your hand mixer if you have an upright standard mixer, electric mixer, like a KitchenAid or an upright Hamilton Beach or something. You could use that. You cream your stick of butter and both your white sugar and brown sugar together. So if I was doing it by hand, I'd just take my wooden spoon, put my stick of butter and my sugars in there, and beat it up till it's real smooth. Then I'm going to do the next sentence. Add my egg and vanilla. Then I'm going to stop and I'm going to mix that together. Then I'm going to stir in my dry ingredients, which means it would be my flour, baking soda, salt. Mix that together, and then I should have cookie dough. Then I'm going to add my chocolate chips and anything else I'd want to add. Walnuts, maybe. Obviously, we don't do those in school because people are allergic to nuts. And then it's dropped by spoon, or if you have a scoop, onto an ungreased, it'll either be greased or ungreased, it'll tell you that. This one is ungreased cookie sheet. Bake 8 to 12 minutes. And I get left off the last sentence. Let it cool shortly before you move it to a wire rack. The reason you don't want to take your pancake turner, your spatula right away, is that the cookies can break apart. If you let them sit for just a few minutes, they'll continue to cook a little and they'll cool just a little bit, and then you can transfer them to your cooling rack. So you could start one at the bottom, and in about 5 minutes, 6 minutes, you could raise it to the top and put a second pan in. I wouldn't put both pans in at once, or you could do one in the center of your oven. Obviously that takes longer, but you have time now that you're at home probably to do that. I'm going to come back and ask if there's any questions on the chocolate chip cookies. Looks like we had a couple people join us. Quadra and Charla, welcome. And Charla. Any questions on the chocolate chip cookies? All right, then I'm going to go over this